Hey, Emily.
Hey, Stephanie.
You want to do a podcast?
Absolutely. Welcome to Cycle Chats, a podcast that destigmatizes what it means to be a woman. This is episode 7, the Vagina Chronicles, with a certified nurse and midwife who discusses all things vagina power. Let's welcome to the podcast, Aiyana. I have many questions, but I'll start off with the basic one. What made you get into this field?
I knew I wanted to help people through like the most pivotal time in their life, at least from my perception. I was that kid who didn't mind watching like the vaginal birth in our sex ed class when we were younger. So it was intriguing to me because it was like, oh my gosh, life, and everyone else is like scrambling off. So I knew like I wanted to work somewhere in healthcare in this process. And in my mind, from I think middle school through high school, I wanted to be an OBGYN because that's all I really knew and understood. I come from a family of like healthcare providers and educators. So my grandmother was a nurse as far as I knew, and then her sister as well. Also, I had a cousin who was a midwife, but I didn't really know very much about that. She was like my grandmother's cousin, so I didn't really know too much. And then I have a lot of great aunts and then like other relatives who are her nurses as well. So I was like, oh, okay, I want to be this doctor. I did like the whole process and was like, yeah, I took the MCAT. I did a post-baccalaureate and I was like, you know what? This is not what I thought it was going to be. It's a simulation of like your first year of medical school. And so ended up one day like sitting down looking at careers and like how I could still accomplish this and still be a part of this world and realm without the medical school portion. And like nursing school just hit me kind of like a ray. Like I always describe it as, you see on TV, like there's light around them and you hear that music. Like that is what happened to me for nursing school, and the doors flung open from that time. So I knew it was like supposed to be. And through nursing school, I discovered more about midwifery. Our OB rotation was like, that's where I was shining. And so I knew from like nursing school and probably a little bit before going in that like I wanted to be a midwife. And then come to find out when my grandmother passed away, that's when I discovered that she had been a midwife in the island of Antigua, which is partially where she was raised. So it was in the bloodline. She didn't talk very much about that, or I should say we didn't dive into that, but the nursing, component, she was really excited about for me. So that's kind of like the roundabout way of how I got there, but it's definitely a passion of mine, something that I felt I was called to do.
That's amazing. So it's a long bloodline of midwives and nurses in your family, which is amazing. And then I love the fact that you said that you were going down a path and you were like, oh, wait a minute, this doesn't actually feel right for me. So I need to change the path, because I have a lot of like friends and family. I myself have been down paths and I'm like, yeah, this is what I want to do. And then you're like starting to take classes and you're like, maybe not. I have to reevaluate. That's great that you were so self-aware that you could do that for yourself and say, okay, how do I do this in a different way? That's really awesome.
Yeah. I think it was hard for people around me because in the setting that I was in and the folks that were supporting me along the way, they heard doctor and they ran with it too. And so it was like, doctor. And I know, I love my mom. She's like my biggest fan, but I think she was devastated to hear that I wasn't going to be a doctor. But at an early age, like knowing, early 20s, knowing that like, this is not going to be for me, it was like, I know you're sad, but like, I can't live my life that way. And I think a lot of times we have difficulty, especially women or people who identify that way, they have difficulty like saying, okay, no, and let me choose a different path. Like sometimes we just feel compelled to the path. And so I think that we have to let that go.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing that you brought up too, is that a lot of times the stigma of like, oh, I want to make my family proud. And because I came from that too, is that there was a big push for do the 9 to 5, get the good job, trust those aha moments, almost like that gut feeling of, you know what though, this path here, just I connect more. It resonates with me more. So I think that's always a struggle, especially. Are you very family oriented?
My background is like Black Caribbean, and so we lean into family. Oftentimes that's like the general umbrella. We do lean into family, and then like what our parents say is super important. And so we almost like we're fed off of disappointment. So it's like, oh no, I'm disappointing somebody, so let me fix this. Some of us have overcome this, but there is this like stigma about pleasing the family and the elders of the family. But you know, you have to grasp. I think I commend this generation that's coming up now, because they are very much like, I'm gonna do what fills me in this moment, and that may not last for 15 years. It may only last for 6 months to a year, and that's fine. You know, if it serves you, it serves you. And I'm taking pieces from like the younger generation and applying it to my own life too, you know.
They live very unapologetically, and I also like the fact that the younger generation has become very culturally aware of what's going on in the world, and they apply that to everything that they do. So I think that's definitely a ticket we should take and we should consume, because it's important that we grow. And, you know, even if we're getting older and we come from a different set of thoughts and beliefs, you're never too old to change. And you know that if you can make a difference in someone's life by taking a moment, reflecting in on what it is you want and what you do, and how can you make a difference with what you're doing, then you're moving in the right path. But you have to acknowledge that connection with yourself.
Something that you said, Aiyana, that hits home is the guilt thing. I feel that so hard. I'm Jewish. I get that Jewish guilt real hard from my family. It is a real thing. And I feel myself doing it. I'm like, oh my God, what, is that in my blood? I don't want it there.
I grew up more predominantly Jewish community, so it was relatable, like the parental guilt, you know, it is definitely relatable. And I think a lot of people who I grew up with have the same kind of thing. But, you know, we branch off and we do our things, and, you know, parents are going to be fine. I think that's the lesson. Like, people are going to be okay. I think too, recently, this kind of connects to like boundaries as well. I think too, people have been exploring what it really means to have a boundary. It feels bad when someone tells you like, hey, no, but it's really forcing us to kind of look at ourselves and like, you know, accept that whatever they're saying to us, you know, is going to benefit them and protect their peace and energy.
Has COVID affected your business? Are more women having babies at home now? Are you seeing a decline?
So no, actually, so let me kind of preface like what I actually do. So, you know, midwives can practice in any setting, actually practice in a hospital setting right now. So it's a very busy hospital practice. We see a lot of patients, but I did notice, especially at the start of the pandemic, there was a lot of mental shift and inquiry about home birth. And a lot of the home birth midwives that I know and love, they have been like inundated with requests for home birth because the hospital is just not a place where many people want to be, understandably so. And so COVID has shifted so much. It shifted how we practice. It shifted how people birth. It's even shifted like emotions, obviously. And so there's a normal roller coaster of pregnancy and how your hormones shift things and how you might respond to things. And then you add a pandemic on top of that, and people are in this like super stressful state, you know, job loss, not having the family support that they would typically have, or leaning on maybe one person in the household who is going to provide for the family as opposed to having two. Or you have kids already at home who need to be in school, but you have to work. So how are you working out the Zoom situation? Then you have so now it's not a matter of like our little teeny boppers going out and having sex. It's the older population who are at home, and it's like a blizzard. Like, I'm from the East Coast, so, you know, you don't go out in the blizzard, you stay in, and that means you have to find ways to have fun. And they've found ways. And what's interesting is early pandemic, and you'll find most hospitals like this too, they have pushed off or postponed elective procedures. Well, vasectomies and bilateral tubal ligations, or tying your tubes, are considered elective procedures. We can fight about that topic because I have my own thoughts about that. It's not elective, it's necessary.
And I have to just intercede for a second, because no, I have a friend who was having severe health problems. And it was because of that. They kept telling her, well, it's elective and you're too young. And the doctor told her, we don't want to do anything that's permanent because you might want to have kids later. And she said, I don't want kids. I'm 25. I'm good. I don't want kids. I don't want to be sick. I can adopt. They're like, no, we really think that that's a choice that you might regret later. She's like, well, how dare you tell me my choices with my body? I'm hurting. This isn't elective. This is going to save my life. I'm going to be sick if I don't get this procedure done. So I'm with you on that. You have backup.
I already had a misconception. I thought midwives were only in the home. So are there other common misconceptions about midwives?
Absolutely. Typically, I think when most folks hear of the word midwife, I mean, I've come across people who don't even know what that means. And what I love is that like during our education, towards the end, they were like, think of your elevator speech. You have 30 seconds to a minute with somebody in an elevator. Like, what do you tell them about midwifery? So one of the common misconceptions is that midwives only deliver in one location, and that's absolutely not true. We deliver everywhere, or we help the birther everywhere is what I should say. And so whether home, hospital, birth center, out in the fields, by the water, you can find us pretty much anywhere. There are different types of midwives. And so I happen to be a certified nurse midwife, meaning I have an educational background as a registered nurse, practiced in a labor and delivery unit for a number of years, and then went on and did a master's level course or training for midwifery or for what they call women's health. And so, you get certified, there's licensing by the state and then nationally. And so with that, most of the hospital-based midwives you will find, most of them, but not all, are certified nurse midwives. There's also certified midwives. There's also another level of midwifery that are qualified and certified to work in the hospital. Usually licensed midwives and I believe certified professional midwives are the ones who will practice more in the home setting. That doesn't mean that they won't go with their patient to the hospital if they're transferred and all of the above. They're still well qualified, experienced, and experts at the art of birth and the course of pregnancy and postpartum. And I think a lot of times too, the misconception is that we're not providers. Like people think we're just like, we just offer this one service, but we really are providers. Like people come to us not only for birth and labor and, pregnancy and postpartum care, but they come to us for their pap smears, for contraceptive counseling, for abortion care. A number of midwives will offer that. We also, do some small procedures. So, there's a wide variety of things that we can do, and just getting it out there is really important to me so that people know, like, you have options. I can't speak for everybody, but we tend to be an option that really is invested in our work. And so it's of high importance. And so we really want to make sure people get good quality care.
So is there a difference, because I know the word doula, is there a difference between a midwife and a doula?
Absolutely. Doulas are amazing, number one. But doulas are considered, like, I hate to use one generalization because doulas can be used in many different avenues. But when it comes to birth and postpartum, doulas tend to be like a coach, a support person, someone who's going to guide the birther and their family along the way. They help during labor management. They help prenatally too, maybe preparing them for postpartum. Postpartum doulas are absolutely amazing. They come by and help sometimes with breastfeeding if they're qualified. They'll help, prepare the home and get meals going, maybe help with some laundry, and just offering the family some necessary things that they might need during their postpartum period. There's also end-of-life doulas, people who walk with people who are going to be passing away. There's sex doulas. There's doulas who practice and they offer care for those who have had loss or miscarriages before. And so there's all sorts of doulas, and they're just people who walk alongside other folks to just help them in their journey. And midwifery is kind of parallel, except we are medical providers on top of that. So you're not going to find a doula diagnosing and then like medically treating per se. They'll be very knowledgeable about birth and pregnancy, postpartum and beyond. Not any medical advice or medical treatment, whereas a midwife will. We do the medical treatment. And then we also offer some supportive care too. So our paths kind of overlap, but also there's some distinction, along the way too.
It's so hard to be a woman sometimes. And the fact that we have these bodies that are made to like make a human is insane. insane. If you're pregnant and it's the first time, you've never grown a baby inside of you. You don't know what's going to happen. So just the idea of having somebody that's so supportive and is going to walk you through it, who's like, I got this, don't worry, is so beautiful. It makes me want to cry. Like, congratulations to you to be able to do that for other women.
It's not done solo. Like along the way, you build that community and that connection. And that's so critical. That's like the keystones of midwifery too, is like having this community of other midwives to back you, so it, definitely life is not meant to do alone. Pregnancy and birth is absolutely not meant to do alone. So I'm glad to be a part of it and help other people through their journey, but also I'm glad that I have my own set of midwives to back me up too.
Well, everybody needs community, and I think that's really important too, especially with so much divide that had been happening. It's so nice to hear that, especially in that industry, that you're creating this sense of safety, because that's what it sounds like to me, is especially kind of playing off of, we talked a little bit of postpartum depression. I get very nervous that that's going to happen to me because I deal with some mental health issues, and I just have always had this very strong feeling that if I were to have a child, that would be something that I would deal with. And to know that there is someone to hold your hand to say, hey, you're not alone. This isn't forever. We're going to get you through this. That takes such a burden off of your shoulders. Do you find with women who are dealing with postpartum depression, what do you find is the toughest part of that?
And also, what is postpartum depression? Because some people don't know what it is.
Just to clarify too, because we use the word postpartum as a broad umbrella for like mood disorders, but really postpartum is once the baby's here and the rest of your life. They call it the fourth trimester. Postpartum is after you've had your baby, that time period. Unfortunately, to shorten it, fortunately and unfortunately, to shorten it, most people will say postpartum when they mean postpartum depression. And I'm really big about making the clarification between the two, because for some people, they may not experience postpartum depression. So postpartum depression is depression after having the baby. There's a lot that goes on. You might have heard the term postpartum blues. There's a difference between postpartum blues and depression as well. And then there's a whole cascade of other mood disorders. So another thing that's overlooked often is postpartum anxiety. So people have this like strong fear of like leaving the house because of the baby, or that the baby, something's going to happen to the baby, so they don't sleep. They're like hovering over the baby. There's like high anxiety over that. So another thing that I wanted to mention too is like, I say this a lot too, is like, just because you get pregnant doesn't mean like whatever mental health issues you might be going through are going to disappear. They will intensify. Absolutely. And so it's important. I'm not to sound morbid, but like,
no, but it's good that you're educating, because I've had such a common misconception with this, especially in terms of getting pregnant and like what your body goes through, because everybody tells you something different. They're like, oh my God, your skin's glowing. It's the best thing ever. You're going to be, but I think there's just so much more to it. So I'm so happy that you're making this clarification for us.
It's never, I was talking to, before we started, I was talking to Emily a little bit of like, it's never too late or too early rather to prepare yourself. Like, you want to become pregnant at some point. Well, the preparation starts now. Like, even if you're not in a relationship, if you're not planning on having babies for the next 2 to 3 years, it doesn't hurt to start preparing yourself now, because in the event that it happens, or, it's planned and it happens, then you have some kind of like plan in your mind, even if that plan doesn't go exactly how you want it to, but the things that you need to prepare yourself and to walk this path. Many things can happen along the way. Like, we can't predict and prepare for everything, but we can give you a generalization of the things to expect. So there's a lot that happens, not just postpartum, but people experience anxiety and depression in pregnancy. And going back to COVID, because that's like the thing now, people are experiencing a lot more prenatal anxiety and depression. Even our numbers for postpartum depression and anxiety and psychosis, which is an extreme emergency, that has increased as well, because, we don't have the community is normally around to help us during these times. And then you have this like pandemic emotional fog that kind of sits over you too. And it's contributing to how people are feeling. But, that's kind of the postpartum depression, feeling down, not wanting to bond with your baby baby, or thoughts of wanting to harm yourself or someone else. That's very dangerous. No connection, not wanting to do your daily routines. Those are the things we kind of like tell patients to look out for. The blues is kind of expected because what happens after having a baby is you deliver the placenta, which is like a powerhouse for hormones. And so when that comes out of you and it, you know, it comes out and it's like, oh, it came out. But like internally, your body's like, choo, 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 choo. You know, I will not do that again.
I just saw the placenta holding a gun. Pew, 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 pew. Like a little laser gun. That's what I saw.
Your body is firing off. And so, and trying to get back to like, you know, we always say homeostasis or like this level of normalcy. And it takes time, but that sudden shift in hormones can really make people feel like really low. And it's a response. Now, we're talking about one concept. And then on top of that, you have your social life around you. So do you have a good supportive partner? Did you have the birth that you wanted? Are you experiencing other like comorbidities or diagnoses or complications? Because all of that also contributes to how you feel. Again, this is not to like bring anyone down, but like the reality of it is, hey, let's prepare for a time where you might be low. What are the things that you can do to like make you feel a little bit better? Or what are the things that you're going to need in order to sustain yourself through that time?
So we talked about the placenta and I wrote down a question because I know this is a thing. Eating the placenta, I know that there's positives and negatives. A lot of people, because you were saying that it holds all those hormones. So I'm assuming if you eat it, you would regain some of that. Is that the thought process?
So yeah, ideally the thought behind it is, so not just eating it, but they do encapsulation. So they'll, people can, it's almost like a freeze dry and put it into a pill form as well. But I have had patients make smoothies, make different entrees. I know it sounds crazy, but it's also, you know, if it's going to benefit you, by all means, absolutely, let's do it. There's challenges to conducting research around ingesting the placenta because, you know, you have to have this like kind of blind study and all kinds of different things in terms of the research. However, what is suspected and what the thought process is behind encapsulation is helping with mood disorders, helping again that level of homeostasis with the hormones and nourishment value, you know, so like kind of restoring your blood levels in the body too. So those are the concepts behind it. If someone, you know, feels that it helped them, if they did it once before, let's do it again. Or if they've read on it and they want to do it, absolutely, they can either ingest or encapsulate.
I've heard that delivering the placenta hurts more than delivering the baby. Yay, nay, different for everybody?
Different for everybody and different depending on where you are birthing or have had your baby. So you will notice, and I can't generalize because we all practice differently, but oftentimes when you're at home and when you are in a birth center, birth often goes at the pace of the birther and the baby, and not the pace of the hospital and the clock that you're put on when you get into the hospital, because you are put on a clock when you get in there. Like, oh, it's been 2 hours. Why hasn't this patient made change? Well, because whatever reason, maybe her baby's in a weird, funky position and we have to like help, you know, the patient out, help the baby out too. I say all that to say, oftentimes when you're delivering at home, in the absence of any complication, we're letting that placenta come out on its own. It's not going to be pulled or tugged on. Now, when you're in the hospital, sometimes, again, the clock. So the ideal is that we need to get the placenta out now. And that's taught often. We do kind of have parameters. We want the placenta to come out hopefully within 30 minutes or so of the baby being born. It being in there longer increases the risk of like a hemorrhage or excessive bleeding. So that's why we do want it out. But also that doesn't mean we had to force it out. There's still time. In the hospital setting, I can speak to this because I work there. Sometimes we're a little bit more aggressive with delivering the placenta as opposed to home birth or a birth center setting. And when we do kind of aid the placenta in coming out, many of us are taught to kind of hold on to the uterus at the top. And if you think about this, your uterus is just done. It's a muscle that's just done who knows however many hours of work. And if you were like working out and you were doing these bicep curls for like, 24 hours and someone went and touched your bicep, you would probably want to slap them. Think of it that way too. Like some people are like, please don't touch my uterus, don't touch my vagina. I just had a baby come out. And so I, try to be as hands-off as possible. But sometimes with the delivery of the placenta, you'll find that like it can be uncomfortable, it can be painful. And then if there is a thing where placentas or products or pieces of the placenta can be left inside, that can be really painful because we do have to get those out. Otherwise, that can cause a hemorrhage too. Some people, yes, may have had a really bad experience with their placenta. Other people, in most cases, I would say, it just kind of feels like a little plop coming out. It's like people get nervous because they're like, I just had this baby come out. But then like when the placenta finally like comes out, they're like, oh, that wasn't so bad.
You mentioned sex during pregnancy. That's always something that's been very fascinating to me. What are the benefits of that? Is that good for the baby, or is that more just stimulation for the couple?
I mean, I think sex, my opinions on it is like sex is like a normal part of many relationships. And for some people it's not, but for a good majority of folks, like sex is like still an enjoyable part of a relationship, one component. And so that doesn't stop because you got pregnant. It may change. It may look different. When we think of like different trimesters, some people early pregnancy, they're so sick that it's like the furthest thing from their mind. And then we have other people who feel great and feel like themselves and they continue in their normal sexual activities, which is fine. Not a problem. What's important to know too is like, even when you're not pregnant, the vaginal tissue and your uterus will have some irritability or spasm-like activity when you're having an orgasm or during sex, and things lengthen, there's a lot of moisture, all that stuff. And that's still true while you're pregnant as well. So for some people who have like certain complications, we'll tell them, in your case, we're going to, again, those pelvic precautions. So someone who has a previa, we're going to say to them, no sex until we can verify that partial previa, if it's there, that has moved away, or if it's early bleeding in pregnancy, we might caution people to abstain. But the hormones themselves during pregnancy, sometimes shift for people where their drive goes way up. They're just like all the time. And I've had many a conversation in the office about that, and it's perfectly fine. Like, it's normal. So people think that something is wrong with them, and there's nothing wrong with you. You just have an increased sex drive, and that's okay. Sex is also something we encourage when we're talking about sex with a penis or people with penises. We're talking about towards the end of pregnancy, we do encourage intercourse if people are okay with it, because the prostaglandins and semen help with the cascade of labor, or are thought to help with the cascade of labor. So that and nipple stimulation, which you can do with a breast pump, or you can have a partner help you. Those are the things that kind of are the at-home induction methods to try to get labor going. I know it sounds like a foreign concept, if you haven't thought about it before, you're like, sex while pregnant sounds strange, but it's like, it's a normal thing, but it's also normal for the drive to drop too. So you can be on either end or in the middle there. Everyone's different.
What's your favorite part of your job?
My favorite part, there's so many parts that are my favorite. I love teaching and like kind of the critical thinking that we have to do in order to get to like what is happening for somebody. I see people for just, GYN. So they're coming in for like discharge or vaginal irritation. So I like the part where I'm listening to somebody tell me what's going on with them. And then I use my clinical judgment too to kind of like meet them where they are. And then we kind of figure out together what possibly could be going on. And then I like what I just did, which was like explaining things like the previa or, sex drive, all that. I like teaching, but I also absolutely love birth. Like, I really, really love birth and seeing people through their pregnancy and into this new journey of the birthing process. Sometimes it's scary, sometimes it's challenging, but oftentimes it's very rewarding. There is a common misconception that like labor and delivery or birth is like always magical, and that's not true. I mean, it's magical, but it's not always true. Sometimes there are, hiccups along the way. Sometimes there are major disturbances, major experiences that happen that aren't necessarily, I don't want to say positive, that they're not positive, but they're life-changing in a different way. And so that's hard, but at the same time, like, my favorite parts really are getting to know people, what they want out of their experience, and then helping them achieve that. And then also like helping them learn more about themselves along the way, however that looks, So those are like the exciting parts of my job.
Do you have a favorite birth story that you can share?
I do. I mean, I have like a ton because there's been so many, but my first birth experience when I was actually still a student was like, it was like divine. It was like, this is how I knew I was supposed to be a midwife. So, like, this is my first day with my preceptor who's training me, and very busy hospital practice, but the day didn't seem like slammed. It just seemed like, you know, the normal hustle bustle. It was a rainy day and I live in Southern California and that doesn't really happen. So it's like, what, you know? So we go into the room and like, you know, she's pushing and my preceptor, the first one I had was just like, get in there. You know, your first day, you're like, what? Like, what do I do? Where do I put my hands? But you know, you're preparing for this. So I'm like, okay. And, you know, I tell myself when I'm walking into situations where it's like a new experience, like you gotta just be confident sometimes. And so I was just like, okay, Aiyana, like this is what you're supposed to be doing. So, you know, get it together. So the rain just like stopped, like I think as the baby's crowning and the baby comes out, and I hadn't been around the person all day, so I hadn't really gotten too much like information, but she pushed and it was a boy. And then as soon as she stopped pushing and the baby was out, the rain started again. So I'm like, oh, okay. And you know, we're talking, I was like, well, so what are you naming your baby? And the name was Noah. And like for those who get like the biblical reference, it's like it just was really crazy that like the rain just stopped right then as the baby was born, and then it just picked up again like as soon as the baby was born, and the baby's born name is Noah. And I was like, oh, and it just felt in the moment too, it just felt like it made sense. But it was like my first birth that I ever attended and was able to like support the person. And you know, it was just beautiful to me. Like I was just like, this is amazing. So pretty cool. And then another one that I attended that was really special because Black birth is super important to me because there's so much going on, so much that has been going on. And I remember this patient who I think she had previously had a loss and they had been like praying for their baby, like, you know, and so, you know, labor went fine, some hiccups here and there. And then she had her baby and like, she just wept. And I know that sounds like, I don't want to ever see anybody cry, but she was just like rejoicing because she successfully had a baby and they were just so like happy. And that will forever be in my mind. Oh my gosh. Another one, I don't have top favorite, but I do have to say this. August was a really pivotal time. Like things at my job were kind of crazy for me and I was just feeling really stressed. And the morning I was on over a night shift, I might have been, sometimes I'll do 24-hour calls in the hospital and sometimes I'll do overnight shifts. Yeah, this is midwife life. And so I was getting ready to go home, but they called me for one more delivery. Someone had just gotten there. We kind of call it like a stop and drop, like they literally stop and have their baby. And so I think someone else had admitted her, and so they called me for delivery. And so I was like, okay. And so I walk in there and I'm like, hi, my name's Aiyana. I'm gonna help you with your birth here. Sorry, we're just meeting right now, but like you're ready. And the dad's looking at me like, what's your name? And like looking at my badge. And I'm like, uh-oh, like, what did I do? Like, am I in trouble? And he's like, well, we're naming our child. And people don't spell my name, like Aiyana typically isn't spelled like how I spell it, which is Aiyana. There's a lot of vowels in there. So to find someone who has the same spelling, it's like usually like, oh my gosh, like, you know, you're kind of celebrating. It's very rare that I've seen anybody with that spelling. And so like, I was like, oh my gosh. And the nurse was like, I wanted to surprise you. So and talking to some friends later on about this, and you know, we kind of count receipts with each other because, you know, sometimes you're down on yourself and you're not realizing like how much you're doing. So like they pull it out of you sometimes, like your close circle. And one of my friends said to me, she was like, you gave birth to yourself. Do you realize like how impactful that is? And it was at a time where it was like, it was so necessary for me. And it just like took me aback. Also like tears in my eyes, all that stuff. It's like a representation of like what midwifery and birth work is. Like we are reborn and transformed every time we come across people. And so are the birthers, like moms, parents, women, men, you know, whoever they identify as. Families are reborn oftentimes during birth. And so that was just so significant. That's probably like top. And so, yeah, those are a few of the stories that are like, you know, forever ingrained in my mind.
Oh my gosh, my heart is just so full. So I have one more question because we ask it to everybody and I think it's a really important question. What advice would you give your 15-year-old self?
So much. I would say, number one, lean into your shine, because I mean, still am. Maybe it's a little bit jaded now because adulthood, but I was that bubbly, oh my gosh, silver lining, like, but let's look at the positive. Why can't everybody just get along? Like, that was who I was. And for, I would say, like, the better portion of my late 20s, I questioned. And I know that's after 15, but like, I questioned, like, why am I like this? Why do I care so much? Why do I feel so compelled to other people? And now it's not a matter of why. It's like, this is part of who you are. Like, and that's okay, you know? And you feel, you know, the emotions of other people, and you can empathize and sympathize, and like your heartstrings are just drawn into folks, and that's okay. Like, so number one, lean into like the bubbly person, the connected person, the emotional person that you are. It's okay. And then also I would tell her, you are gonna do what you want to do, but it's gonna look different from what you thought it would. And that's so much like birth too. It's like people come in with their plans and they're like, I have this birth plan, and that's great because you want to be prepared, but like the course of your life changes in so many different directions, and there's detours, but it doesn't mean like the road is always blocked off. It just means you're taking a different path to get to the place you want to be. And so I would tell my younger self, like, don't worry, you may not be this doctor that you're hyping yourself up to be, but you want to be in a space that is right for you. And that's where I am. Like, I'm in a space that's right for me right now. I've been talking to a lot of, again, that midwifery circle, the village that I have, about defining midwifery and what it looks like for you, because we've been told through the course of like our training and profession, gotta look this way. You're either gonna do this or you're gonna do this. And there's like no gray zone, but it's absolutely all gray, and that's okay. And gray in a good way. Like, you can have it look however you want it to look so that it feels right for you. So I would definitely tell my younger self, like, you're gonna be all right. Like, things are gonna pan out better than you could have even imagined. So I think those are the takeaways.
Aiyana, before we sign off, a humongous thank you for taking your time to like have this educational lesson. I feel like I just got schooled in the best way possible. Do you have any fun projects coming up, and where can people find you so they can also absorb all of this education and knowledge?
So you can find me on Instagram at the Vagina Chronicles. I'm on Clubhouse now at tvchronicles because it's too long to put the vagina. I think Twitter is the Vag Chronicles. And then there's my website, which I'm building more off of right now. So that's probably the best way to like subscribe and connect. I've got a little blog. I have a shop. So things will be kind of propelling this year in that realm. And you can find me on www.thevagina.chronicles.org. So I'm a .org and a not .com. Actually, right now we're a couple weeks into a postpartum prep group where I'm doing with a good friend of mine, Kanita Bourne of Reborn Wellness. She's a licensed clinical therapist, and we have a 6-week postpartum prep group. So this is for people who are currently pregnant. It's currently for Black birthers. And so it's a postpartum prep group. We're most likely going to be launching more groups the rest of the year. And then I'm planning to also launch a pregnancy prep group. So for people who either have never been pregnant or want to prepare for a pregnancy 5 years from now or tomorrow, that's going to be happening soon too. So that's where you can find me, and those are the projects that are happening. And I'm always speaking somewhere, doing something, which I love doing.
We thank everyone for listening. We thank you, Aiyana, so much for shedding your light and shining your light on this podcast. And we hope that you sync up with us next time.
Pew, 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 pew. I had to do it one more time.